Everyone thought I was just the quiet, sweet mother of the groom. No designer dress, no flashy jewelry, no hint of the $95 million in my name. Because this time, I was watching to see who treated me like a person and who only chased a fortune. What happened at that wedding exposed everyone. Greed, kindness, hypocrisy, love. And when I finally revealed the truth, let's just say some jaws never quite closed. Hey friends, welcome back to the channel where real stories hit harder than fiction. Today's story, it's got money, mystery, and a lesson in respect that everyone needs to hear. When a secret millionaire mom hides her fortune at her son's wedding, what unfolds becomes the ultimate test of character. So if you're ready for a twist, truths, and a little poetic justice, you're in for a ride. Before we dive in, do me a quick favor. Tap that like button if you believe respect should be earned, not bought. Subscribe to the channel and hit that bell so you never miss a juicy news story. Share this video with someone who still believes in doing the right thing, whether someone's rich or not. Let's find out what really happened when a $95 million secret was kept, just to see who would show true respect. When my son got married, I kept the $95 million secret just to see who'd treat me with respect. My name is Samuel Washington, and I'm about to tell you a story that changed everything I thought I knew about family, respect, and the true nature of people's hearts. At 63 years old, I've seen enough of this world to know that money changes people, sometimes for the better, often for the worse. But nothing could have prepared me for what I discovered after my beloved wife Lorraine passed away last spring. Before I continue with my story, please subscribe to this channel if you haven't subscribed yet, and also comment which country you're listening from. I'll love to know if I'm being listened to all over the world. Thank you, Lorraine, and I have been married for 38 years. She was my anchor, my compass, the woman who made me believe in love at first sight when I spotted her at that Howard University homecoming dance back in 1986. We weren't rich. I worked as a maintenance supervisor at the city hospital, and she taught third grade at the local elementary school. We lived comfortably in our modest 3-bedroom house in Southeast D.C., raised our son, Marcus, right, and never wanted for anything essential. When the doctors told us about the aggressive cancer spreading through her pancreas, we had maybe 3 months to process it all. 3 months to say everything we'd never said, to hold each other through the tears, to prepare for a life I couldn't imagine living without her. Sam, she whispered to me during one of our last conversations, her voice barely audible above the hospital machines. There's something in the safety deposit box at First National, box 247. The key is in my jewelry case behind the velvet lining. I figured she meant important papers, birth certificates, maybe some bonds her grandmother had left her. Lorraine came from a family that believed in keeping things just in case, and I expected to find maybe a few thousand in old savings bonds. 2 weeks after the funeral, when the house felt too quiet and I needed something to do with my hands, I finally made the trip to the bank. The young teller, a sweet girl who remembered Lorraine from her frequent visits, led me to the safety deposit box room with a sympathetic smile. Mrs. Washington was such a lovely lady, she said softly. I'm so sorry for your loss. I nodded, not trusting my voice, and turned the key. Inside that small metal box was a manila envelope thick enough to choke a horse. My hands shook as I opened it, expecting maybe insurance papers or old photos. Instead, I found documents that made me sit down hard in that little chair they provide. Trust documents, investment, portfolios, real estate deeds, all in Lorraine's maiden name, Lorraine Catherine Mitchell. Names and accounts I'd never heard her mention. The final tally, according to the neat handwriting on the summary sheet in her careful teacher script, was $94,847,293.17. $95 million. Give or take some change. I read that number so many times the security guard came to check on me. Turned out my Lorraine, my sweet school, teacher wife, had been a millionaire, a multi-millionaire for nearly 30 years. And I never knew. She watched me stress over bills, work overtime to afford Marcus textbooks, save every penny for his college expenses, all while sitting on enough money to buy half the neighborhood. But I understood why she did it. Lorraine knew me better than I knew myself. She knew I had pride, maybe too much of it. She knew I needed to feel like I was providing for my family with my own two hands. And she was right. I decided not to tell Marcus. Immediately, my son had just finished his residency at Johns Hopkins and was starting his career as a pediatric surgeon. He was finally independent, making his own way, and I wanted to see how this money might change things, or if it needed to change anything at all. Marcus had always been a good kid, respectful and hardworking. He called every Sunday, visited when he could, and never made me feel like my blue-collar job was something to be ashamed of. But lately, something had been different in his voice during our calls. There was an excitement, a nervous energy that reminded me of how he used to sound before big exams. 3 months after I discovered Lorraine's secret, Marcus drove down from Baltimore with news that explained everything. "Dad, I want you to meet someone special," he said, practically bouncing on my living room sofa like he was 12. Years old again. "Her name is Victoria Ashworth, and I'm going to ask her to marry me." The Ashworth name meant nothing to me, but the way Marcus said it, like he was announcing he'd won the lottery, made me pay attention. "Tell me about her son." Marcus's eyes lit up in a way I'd never seen since he got accepted to medical school. "She's incredible, Dad. Smart, beautiful, kind. She's finishing her MBA at Georgetown, and her family, well, they're pretty successful. Her dad owns Ashworth Capital Management." I still didn't recognize the name, but I could hear the awe in my son's voice. "And you love her?" "I love her more than anything," he said, and I could see he meant it. "I want to bring her to meet you next weekend, if that's okay. Maybe we can have dinner here like we used when I was growing up." I agreed, of course. I wanted to meet the woman who'd capture my son's heart. But something in Marcus's demeanor, a nervousness I'd never seen before, made me wonder what he was really worried about. Victoria Ashworth was everything Marcus had promised and more. Beautiful in that polished magazine cover way with honey, blonde hair and the confident bearing of someone who'd never doubted their place in the world. She was gracious and polite, complimenting my house and asking thoughtful questions about my work at the hospital. But there was something else there, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. It was in the way her eyes quickly scanned my modest living room, taking in the worn furniture and family photos. It was in how she smiled when I served dinner on Lorraine's good china, plates that seemed elegant to us, but probably looked quaint to someone who'd grown up with real wealth. "Mr. Washington, Marcus has told me so much about you," she said over my attempt at Lorraine's famous pot roast. "It must be incredibly rewarding working in healthcare. Maintenance. You really keep everything running." Her tone was perfectly pleasant, but something about the way she emphasized maintenance made my jaw tighten. Marcus either didn't notice or chose to ignore it. Dad's being modest. Marcus jumped in. "He's not just maintenance. He's the head of facilities management for the entire hospital. They can't function without him." Victoria smiled sweetly. "Of course, essential workers are so important." The phrase essential workers hung in the air like a challenge. It wasn't what she said, it was how she said it, like she was patting a child on the head for trying hard. But Marcus was glowing and Victoria was polite enough, so I kept my observations to myself. If my son was happy, I could tolerate a little condescension from his future wife. It was when they were leaving that I overheard the conversation that really opened my eyes. I was in the kitchen wrapping up leftovers from Marcus to take back to Baltimore when I heard Victoria's voice drifting from the front porch. "Babe, Are you sure about having the wedding here? In D.C.? I mean, your father seems lovely, but what? Marcus' voice was sharper than I'd heard him in years. Nothing. Nothing. It's just my parents are used to a certain level of, maybe we could have a small ceremony here and then a bigger reception at the country club. That way, everyone's comfortable. My father raised me, Marcus said. This is where I'm from. And I love that about you, Marcus. I love your authenticity, your background. It's refreshing. I just want to make sure everyone feels welcome. Sometimes people from different worlds can feel out of place. I heard Marcus sigh. Maybe you're right. We could do something at their parents' club. My hand stilled on the aluminum foil. My son, the boy I'd raised to be proud of where he came from, was already starting to compromise who he was. I said nothing when Marcus came back for the leftovers. I hugged him goodbye and told Victoria it was lovely meeting her. But that night, lying in the bed I'd shared with Lorraine for 38 years, I made a decision. I was going to keep that money secret a little longer. I wanted to see how deep this rabbit hole went. Over the next few months, as wedding plans began, in earnest, I got to know the Ashworth family better, and the more I learned, the less I liked what I saw. Charles Ashworth III was the kind of man who made sure you knew he was important within the first 5 minutes of conversation. He managed investment portfolios for high net worth individuals, which he mentioned frequently. His wife, Patricia, was what my grandmother would have called society, the type of woman who organized charity galas and spoke about giving back to the community while looking right through the people who served her drinks. They lived in a colonial mansion in PTOAC, Maryland, complete with a circular driveway, manicured gardens, and the kind of old money elegance that whispered wealth instead of shouting it. When Marcus brought me to their house for dinner, I felt like I was visiting a museum. Samuel, Charles said, gripping my hand in what was probably supposed to be a firm handshake, but felt more like he was testing my strength. Marcus tells us, you work at the hospital. Must be satisfying work keeping the lights on. Again with the condescension wrapped in politeness. It has its rewards, I replied evenly. Patricia was more subtle, but no less clear in her opinions. We're so excited about the wedding, she gushed over cocktails served by unformed housekeeping staff. Victoria has such diverse taste in people. It's one of her most admirable qualities. Diverse taste in people. Like Marcus was some kind of exotic accessory she'd picked up at a boutique. Throughout the evening, I watched my son transform. Before my eyes, the Marcus I knew, confident, straightforward, proud of his accomplishments, became differential, almost apologetic. When Charles asked about his residency, Marcus downplayed his achievements. When Patricia mentioned the wedding budget, Marcus quickly offered to contribute, more than I knew he could afford. Don't be silly, darling, Patricia laughed, touching Marcus's arm like he was a sweet but confused child. Charles and I are happy to handle the wedding expenses. We understand the financial differences between our families. The way she said financial differences made it sound like we were refugees they graciously decided to sponsor. But the conversation about the wedding guest list, that really got to me. Now, Samuel, Patricia said, consulting a leather-bound planner, will need a list of your family and friends for the invitations. The venue can accommodate about 300 guests. 300 guests. Lorraine and I had gotten married in our church basement with maybe 60 people, and we thought that was a crowd. I don't need many invitations. Most of my family is gone, and I've got maybe 20 friends I'd want to invite. Patricia's smile became even more strained. Of course, we understand. Sometimes smaller families are cozier. Charles cleared his throat. We should probably discuss the seating arrangements. 2. We'll have some important business associates attending. Senators, judges, CEOs. We want to make sure everyone's comfortable. The unspoken message was clear. My 20 friends from the hospital in the neighborhood weren't going to be seated with the senators and CEOs. Marcus said nothing. He just nodded along like this was all perfectly reasonable. That night, driving home to my empty house, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Shame. Not shame about who I was or what I'd accomplished, but shame that my son was letting these people make him ashamed of where he came from. I thought about Lorraine, about how she would have handled the Ashworths. She would have smiled sweetly, complimented Patricia's dress, and somehow made it clear that she wasn't impressed by their money or their attitude. She had a way of maintaining her dignity while making other people examine theirs. I missed her so much in that moment that I had to pull over and collect myself. When I got home, I looked at the bank statements for the accounts Lorraine had left me. $95 million. More money than the Ashworths probably had, despite all their posturing. More money than Marcus could imagine. But I kept the secret. I wanted to see how far this would go. As the wedding date approached, the subtle slights became less subtle. During a cake tasting at some high-end bakery in Georgetown, Patricia made sure to mention that they were keeping costs reasonable because not everyone can afford the luxury tier. When we toured the venue, some exclusive country club that probably cost for one night more than I made in 6 months. Charles made a point of telling me that membership had a pretty selective process, but not to worry because I was their guest. The final straw came during the rehearsal dinner seating discussion. We were gathered in the Ashworths' dining room, going over the final details, when Patricia pulled out her seating chart. "Now, Samuel," she said, not looking up from her carefully organized papers, "we'll need place you at table 12 near the back. You'll be with some of our, well, let's call them our more casual guests. We thought you'd be more comfortable there. Table 12 near the back with the casual guests." Marcus was studying his phone, pretending not to hear the conversation. Victoria was arranging flowers, also conveniently distracted. "Kind," I said quietly. Patricia beamed like I just made her day easier. "Wonderful. You're so understanding, Samuel." Not everyone would be so gracious about the logistics of a large wedding. But Charles wasn't done. "We really appreciate your flexibility, Sam." "Can I call you Sam? This kind of event can be overwhelming for people who aren't used to it. We want everyone to feel welcome, but we also need to be mindful of our other guests' expectations. Their other guests' expectations, like I, was some kind of embarrassment they needed to manage." "I understand completely," I said, and I did. I understood that these people saw me as Marcus's burden, something to be tolerated and tucked away where I couldn't embarrass their important friends. What hurt most wasn't their attitude. I dealt with prejudice and condescension my whole life. What hurt was watching my son go along with it. Marcus, the boy I taught to stand up for himself and others. Marcus, who'd seen me work double shifts to pay for his education and never once act like I was ashamed of honest work. Marcus, who used to brag to his friends about how his dad fixed everything at the hospital. That Marcus was sitting right there, letting his future in-laws treat his father like a second-class citizen. The wedding was everything Patricia had promised it would be: elegant, expensive, and designed to impress. The country club was decorated with thousands of white roses and enough candles to light up half of Maryland. The guest list read like a who's who of Washington power players. I wore my best suit, the one I bought for Lorraine's funeral, and tried to blend into the background. At table 12, I was seated with two elderly relatives of Charles, who seemed confused about why they were there. A college friend of Victoria's, who spent the entire reception on her phone, and a few other people who were clearly being managed rather than celebrated. From my seat near the back, I watched Marcus and Victoria exchange vows in front of an altar that probably cost more than my annual salary. My son looked handsome in his expensive tuxedo, and Victoria was radiant in a dress that I later learned cost more than my car. I thought about Lorraine during the ceremony. She would have cried happy tears, I knew, but she also would have been hurt by how we'd been treated. The reception was a carefully orchestrated display of wealth and influence. Charles gave a speech about welcoming Marcus into our family that made it sound like they were doing him a tremendous favor. Victoria's maid of honor talked about how lucky Victoria was to find someone so genuine and down to earth. Everything was beautiful. Everything was perfect. And I felt like a stranger at my own son's wedding. Marcus hadn't spoken to me since the ceremony beyond a quick handshake and a "Thanks for coming, Dad." He was too busy working the room, shaking hands with Charles's business associates, laughing at jokes from people who'd probably never heard of him 6 months ago. I watched my son, the boy who used to help me fix things around the house, who'd call me after every major exam to share his grades, who'd held my hand at his mother's funeral, transform into someone I barely recognized. That's when Patricia stood up for her mother of the bride toast. Patricia Ashworth rose from the head with the kind of confidence that comes from never doubting your place in the world. The room quieted respectfully, crystal glasses raised in anticipation. "Good evening, everyone," she began, her voice carrying easily across the elegant ballroom. "Charles and I are so thrilled to welcome all of you to celebrate this wonderful union between our daughter Victoria and her new husband Marcus." Polite applause rippled through the crowd. I noticed she'd said Marcus like she was still getting used to the name. When Victoria first told us about Marcus, we were impressed by his dedication to his medical career and his authentic approach to life. It's refreshing to meet someone so genuine, so unspoiled by the pressures of our modern world. There was that word again, authentic, like Marcus was some kind of folk art she had discovered at a country fair. Patricia continued, her smile never wavering. "Of course, joining our families means adjustments on both sides. We've learned so much about different perspectives, different backgrounds, different ways of approaching life." She paused, her eyes scanning the room and lingering for just a moment on table 12, where I sat with the other afterthoughts. "We're confident that Marcus will adapt beautifully to our family's traditions and lifestyle, and we just hope that his side of the family will adjust to the new lifestyle as well. Change can be challenging, but with patience and understanding, we can all learn to navigate these differences together." The words hit me like a physical blow. His side of the family adjust to the new lifestyle, as if we were some kind of charity case that needed to be brought up to their standards. I looked at Marcus, hoping to see some flash of anger, some sign that he recognized the insult his mother-in-law had just delivered to his father. Instead, I saw him nodding slightly like he agreed with her assessment. The room erupted in polite applause. People smiled and raised their glasses, toasting the wisdom and generosity of Patricia Ashworth for so graciously accepting her daughter's choice in husband and his unfortunate family circumstances. That's when something inside me snapped. Not anger exactly. Something colder and more determined than anger. Something that felt like justice finally arriving at the party. I stood up. The movement was slow enough that people near me noticed, but not dramatic enough to interrupt Patricia's ongoing speech about the importance of family unity and mutual respect. I straightened my tie, the same tie I'd worn to Lorraine's funeral, the same tie I'd worn to Marcus's medical school graduation. I cleared my throat. "Excuse me," I said, my voice carrying across the ballroom with the kind of authority that comes from 30 years of managing crises at a major hospital. "I'm sorry to interrupt, Patricia, but I think there's something I need to say." The room went quiet, not the respectful quiet of a planned toast, but the sharp, sudden quiet of 300 people realizing something unexpected was happening. Patricia's smile faltered for just a moment before snapping back into place. "Of course, Samuel. We'd love to hear from Marcus's father." She said it like she was indulging a child who'd asked to say grace at the grown-ups table. I walked slowly toward the front of the room, my footsteps echoing on the polished marble floor. As I moved, I could feel the weight of all those eyes on me. Senators and CEOs and judges, all, probably wondering what the maintenance worker was going to say. Marcus was staring at me with something that looked like panic. Victoria's face had gone pale. Charles was half rising from his chair like he was prepared to escort me out if necessary. I reached the front of the room and turned to face the crowd. 300 of Washington's finest, all dressed in their best clothes, all waiting to see what would happen next. Thank you, all, for being here tonight. I began, my voice steady and clear. It means the world to Marcus and Victoria to have so many people celebrate their love. I paused, looking out at the sea of faces, some curious, some concerned, some clearly annoyed at the interruption. Patricia just mentioned something about adjusting to new lifestyles, and I want to address that directly. I turned to look at her, still smiling, my most polite smile. You're absolutely right that this marriage brings together two different worlds, two different ways of living. Patricia nodded encouragingly, probably thinking I was about to thank her for her patience with my humble circumstances. The thing is, I continued, I've been thinking a lot about respect lately, about what it means and how we show it to each other. And I've been wondering whether respect should depend on how much money someone has, or whether it should be based on who they are as a person. The room was so quiet I could hear the ice settling in people's drinks. See, I've been keeping a secret for the past few months. My late wife, God rest her soul, left me something. When she passed away, something she'd been hiding from me for nearly 30 years, because she was afraid it might change who I was. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, a bank statement I printed that morning, showing the current balance of just one of the accounts Lorraine had left me. Patricia, you mentioned hoping that my side of the family would adjust to this new lifestyle. I unfolded the paper slowly, deliberately. Don't worry about that. I've actually been adjusting to this lifestyle since I inherited $95 million from my wife 6 months ago. I held up the bank statement so the people in the front rows could see it. $95 million from my wife's inheritance, invested carefully over 30 years. I could have bought this country club. I could have paid for this wedding 100 times over, but I wanted to see who would treat me with respect without knowing I had more money than most of the people in this room. The silence that followed was the kind you hear right before thunder crashes. Complete, absolute breathless silence. Patricia's face had gone from pale to gray. Charles was staring at the bank statement, like it might bite him. Victoria looked like she was going to be sick, but it was Marcus's expression that broke my heart. Shock, yes, but also something that looked like recognition, like he was seeing clearly for the first time in months. $95 million, I repeated, folding the paper and putting it back in my pocket, from my wife's inheritance, invested carefully over 30 years. I could have bought this country club. I could have paid for this wedding 100 times over, but I wanted to see who would treat me with respect without knowing I had more money than most of the people in this room. The answer, Patricia, is that most of you treated me exactly the way I expected you would, like someone to be managed and hidden away, like an embarrassment that had to be tolerated for the sake of politeness. Charlesy found his voice. Samuel, we had no idea. No, you didn't. And that's exactly the point. You didn't know, so you felt free to treat me like I was beneath you. You sat me at table 12 with the other people you wanted to forget about. You talked about me like I was a burden Marcus had to carry. You made it clear that my presence at my own son's wedding was something to be managed rather than celebrated. I turned to address the entire room. I've spent my entire life working with my hands, fixing things, keeping systems running. I've been proud of that work because it mattered. I helped keep a hospital functioning so doctors could save lives. I raised a son who became a pediatric surgeon who saves children's lives every day. I was married to a woman who taught hundreds of kids to read and write and believe in themselves. My voice grew stronger as I continued. I never needed anyone's money to know my worth. I never needed anyone's approval to be proud of who I am. But tonight, I watched my son, the boy I raised to stand up for what's right, sit quietly while his new family treated his father like a second-ass citizen. Marcus was crying now, tears streaming down his face as the full weight of what had happened over the past few months finally hit him. Marcus, I said, looking directly at my son, I love you more than life itself. I always will, but I raised you better than this. I raised you to judge people by their character, not their bank accounts. I raised you to be proud of where you came from, not ashamed of it. Victoria was sobbing into her hands, her perfect wedding bait crumbling around her. Patricia and Charles looked like they wanted to disappear into the floor. So, here's what's going to happen, I continued, my voice calm and controlled, despite the chaos I'd unleashed. I'm going to leave now. I'm going to go home to the house where I raised my son, where I loved his mother, where I learned what really matters in life. And I'm going to hope that someday Marcus remembers the lessons we taught him about treating people with dignity and respect. I started walking toward the exit, then stopped and turned back one more time. Oh, and Patricia, you don't need to worry about my side of the family adjusting to your lifestyle. We've been living rich lives all along. We just measured wealth differently than you do. I was halfway to my car when I heard footsteps running behind me. I turned to see Marcus jogging across the parking lot, his expensive tuxedo jacket flapping in the evening breeze. Dad, wait, please, just wait. I stopped, but I didn't turn around. I couldn't look at him yet without feeling the disappointment all over again. Dad, I'm so sorry. I'm so incredibly sorry. I don't know what happened to me. I don't know why I let them treat you like that. I do, I said, finally turning to face him. You got seduced by their world. You started believing that what they had was better than what we had. You forgot where you came from. Marcus was crying, openly now, not caring who might see him from the country club windows. You're right. You're absolutely right. I let them make me ashamed of the best man No, I let them make me ashamed of the man who taught me everything important I've ever learned. Why didn't you tell me about the money all those years watching you work? So hard worry about bills? Because your mother was right. Money changes people. Look what happened to you just being around their money. Marcus, imagine what would have happened if you'd grown up knowing we had more than we could ever spend. We stood there in the parking lot for a long moment, the sound of the reception continuing inside the country club behind us. What happens now? Marcus asked. Now you have to decide who you want to be. You have to decide whether you're going to be the man your mother and I raised, or whether you're going to be the man the Ashworths want you to be. Marcus wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, understanding beginning to dawn in his eyes. I have to go back in there, he said. I have to face them. Yes, you do. And how you handle the next hour is going to determine what kind of man you become. But as Marcus turned to go back inside, I called out to him one more time. Marcus, he stopped and looked back. There's something else you need to know, something I haven't told you yet. His eyes widened, probably wondering what other secrets his old man had been keeping. Your mother didn't just leave me money, son. She left detailed instructions about what to do with it. She wanted to make sure it was used for something meaningful, something that would honor the values we raised you with. I pulled another piece of paper from my jacket. Not a bank statement this time, but a letter in Lorraine's careful handwriting. She wanted to establish a foundation that provides full scholarships for kids from working-class families who want to become doctors, teachers, engineers, kids who have the brains and the heart, but not the bank account. She wanted to make sure intelligence and character mattered more than family wealth. Marcus's eyes filled with fresh tears as the implications sank in. She already had it all planned out. I continued. The Samuel and Lorraine Washington Foundation. She wanted it to be our joint legacy, something that would help kids like you get the education they deserve. Dad, that's incredible. But here's the thing, Marcus. She also wrote that she wanted you to be involved in running it someday when you were ready, when you had learned the difference between having money and being defined by money. I looked back toward the country club, where through the windows we could see the reception, still in full swing, the guests probably gossiping about the drama that had just unfolded. Tonight you showed me you're not ready yet, but I hope someday you will be. Marcus stood there in his expensive tuxedo, tears streaming down his face, finally understanding the full weight of what had happened, not just tonight, but over the past few months as he'd slowly lost himself in someone else's definition of success. How do I fix this, Dad? How do I make this right? You start by going back in there and standing up for what's right. You start by having an honest conversation with your wife about the kind of life you want to build together. You start by remembering that your mother and I raise you to treat people with dignity, regardless of what they can do for you. And if Victoria can't accept that, then you'll have learned something important about the difference between love and convenience. I hugged my son, really hugged him the way I used to when he was small and needed comfort after a bad dream. I love you, Marcus. Nothing will ever change that. But I won't sit quietly. While people treat me like I'm less than human, even if those people are family now, I drove home through the quiet streets of Southeast D.C., past the neighborhoods where I grew up, past the hospital where I'd worked for 30 years, past the church where Lorraine and I were married in a ceremony that cost maybe $300 and was filled with more genuine love than anything I'd witnessed tonight. When I walked into my house, our house, the house where we had raised Marcus and built a life together, I felt the weight of the evening finally settling on my shoulders. But I didn't feel defeated. I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Clear about who I was, clear about what mattered, clear about the difference between having wealth and having worth. I sat down in my recliner, the same recliner where I'd helped Marcus with his homework, where Lorraine had graded papers, where we'd watched him graduate from medical school via live stream during the pandemic, and thought about what came next. The money was real. $95 million carefully invested and grown over 30 years, more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. But Lorraine's plan for the foundation was real, too. The Samuel and Lorraine Washington Foundation, designed to help kids who had talent and drive, but needed someone to believe in them enough to invest in their futures. Kids like Marcus had been. Kids like I had been before I dropped out of college to support my sick mother. Kids who deserved a chance to show what they could do if someone just opened the door. I thought about Patricia Ashworth's comment about adjusting to new lifestyles. She was right in a way. I was going to have to adjust to having this money, to the responsibility that came with it, to the opportunity to make a real difference in young people. Now, tell me, what would you have done if you were in my shoes? I'd love to read from you, too. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and share this video with someone today.